Good afternoon, everybody. It's Michaela. Hi. Happy New Year, because it's the first of the year, and I do have to say that I'm super excited about the fact that the year starts on a Monday. It just feels super nice. Um, I am super sick right now. Like, I have a stomach bug, I have a head cold of some kind, so I'm just all over, not feeling my best. But I wanted to make this video and start the year off right. I didn't want to skip this week. I've also been working really hard on a video for Wednesday that should come out Wednesday, hopefully, fingers crossed, that the sickness that I am feeling doesn't put me out of commission and I'm unable to finish it. But yeah, I wanted to do this. I wanted to do a sort of like wrap up of 2017. Lots of people are doing this. I know that Gretchen for sure is going to be doing her like top and bottom of 2017, but I sort of wanted to do a more holistic look at my goals and some of the notable books. So like some of the bad books that I wanted to discuss and some of the good books that I wanted to discuss as well. Some of them you can see sitting here. But let's start with like my reading goals for 2017. Now, traditionally on Goodreads, my Goodreads challenge has been set to 50 books. That's been my like go-to challenge, and there's years where I far surpass that and years where I like just barely make it. Last year I decided to up the challenge to 75 because on average I read between 50 and 75 books a year. And it made sense, rather than striving for the bottom of my average reading, to strive for the top of my average reading, if that makes sense. And I have decided to do that again for 2018. I've set it for 75 books. Fun facts, I was at about 60 books going into December, so I read about 15 books in December, most of which were audiobooks. Because my work that I've been doing, I've had to travel about an hour each way to and from work, and I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks during that commute, which has helped. But I have been reading physically as well. Yeah, so I had like 15 books I needed to read in a month, and I ended up completing it. I did hit exactly 75 books. The last book, actually 2 books I finished yesterday, one of which I had been listening to for a couple of days, and the other one I listened to in its entirety because it's a collection of short stories. So my last book of 2017 was actually, oh goodness, I'm so sick. I'm sorry, guys. I needed to do an edited video for this, and I don't have the ability to do it. I believe it was Fortune Smiles is the title. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction a couple years back. Fortune Smiles. That makes the most sense. But the second to last book I read was actually this guy, Special Topics in Calamity Physics. This copy I bought on a trip when visiting Taylor this year. If you don't know, one of my top books of 2016 was Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is her debut novel, Special Topics in Calamity Physics, and I kind of wanted it to be my last book, but I ended up finishing it before I finished Fortune Smiles, because I just wanted to know the ending of it. But it seemed like a nice thing that I started off 2016 with Night Film and I ended 2017 with Special Topics. So I don't know. It was an interesting thing that I was trying to do. The other thing that Gretchen and I do, obviously, is the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge we've done the last 2 years. Last year I wasn't able to complete it. I was like 5 categories short. This year I banged it out of the park with my last 15 books. A lot of them also lined up with challenges. Not only did I complete the 40 Pop Sugar reading challenges that we needed to have, but I also completed the extra 12 challenges that they had as like an advanced reading challenge. So I read 52 books from 52 categories, plus a couple extra for my own enjoyment and love of reading. So that was super interesting to do. I like had those books planned out, but I hadn't put them in a list per se. So going into December, I made a list and said, these are the challenges I need to finish. These are the books I want to finish. Plus, I need to read a couple more to hit the 15 mark. I had like 7 challenges left and 15 books to read in total, so about half of them ended up being for the Pop Sugar Challenge, but it did mean that I got to finish that and complete it. And actually, the video I'm working on for Wednesday is that. It is the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge wrap up that I'm going to try and put together my picks and accomplishments and Gretchen's picks and accomplishments into one like kitschy art video. Um, Outside of that, those are the only challenges that I set for myself. I don't really choose like read wider type thing because Pop Sugar actually helps me do that in general. Um, it forces me to pick books outside of my comfort zone. Like an espionage thriller was not a book I was ever going to pick up and read this year without that challenge. Um, and I do tend to read quite widely, ethnically, and origin wise because I prefer translated texts. I prefer text from other countries like Asia and South America, and that tends to influence my reading. I'm not one of those people that needs to push myself to read more books like that. Um, However, going into next year, I do want to try and read more short fiction. It's a thing. I have a whole bunch of collections of short fiction that I purchased, but I don't go to them to read. I'm very much a novel reading person. I'm not even a series reading person. I'm very much a novel reading person. And I did read a couple of collections of short stories, including obviously the one that I mentioned earlier in this video, but I also read a collection of Stephen King short stories, and a collection of Junot Diaz's short stories this year, and I was really enjoying that. So it's one of the things that I'm looking for next year is to do more short stories, read the ones that I have, and maybe look for new authors that do short story collections. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm thinking of going into, but wasn't necessarily thinking about last year. If we're going to talk about my like top books of the year, one of those is going to be this guy. Even though there was a section of this I felt as I was reading it that I was like, we don't necessarily need to be seeing this right now, which is one of the pet peeves that I've come to have when it comes to reading is reading a book and being like, this is all stuff that fine, the characters need to have these conversations, but it didn't need to necessarily happen on screen, so to speak, and we didn't need to read it. There was a little section in here that had that, but Marisha Pessl has a very interesting way of creating stories so that the ending is seeded throughout the rest of the text. And while you don't realize it has anything to do with the ending, it actually is very important to like notice these little bits and details. And I think she does it better in Night Film, which is more explicitly a mystery horror type book, whereas this one is more a coming of age with a mystery element thrown in at the end. I did really love this book, and she's definitely one of my favorite authors and one that I'm going to look for when she comes out with more books. I don't know if she has anything planned for the near future, but that is one of the things that I really loved this year was Marisha Pessel's um, Special Topics in Calamity Physics. One of the other books that I really loved was Stephen King's On Writing, which I had not read before. I have been very open on this channel that I love Stephen King's novels and his short stories, but I hadn't read On Writing, and it's been a book on my to read list for a very long time. And when I finally read it for book club this summer, I was surprised how much it actually inspired me as somebody who may want to write one day. I don't think that I have a story ready to write. I have pieces of stories sort of floating around in my mind, but reading his book, which is part memoir, part advice, part just like, I don't know how to say this. It's not self help, but like you're honest. I don't even know how to say it. He like it lays down the facts and is like, this is how it really is. This is what it's like for somebody who writes best-selling books every single time. This is what it's like for, someone who isn't necessarily considered a literary great, but is definitely a genre great and a best-selling author. And sort of looking at where he came from and how he got where he was, and like being like, don't worry about where you are right now. It's where you want to go. Do the stories that you want to do, type thing. So it was very influential for me, and obviously I highlighted sections throughout it that I found super important because I don't feel like in the future I'm not a rereader, so I'm not going to go back and reread it, but I might want to go back and be like, what was that thing that he said about XYZ, and flip through and look at the highlighted sections to like remind myself of like little nuggets of advice that he gives throughout the book. The third book that I wanted to talk about today was Food in the Attic by Julie Otsuka, which is a teeny tiny little thing that I read on a day where Gretchen and I decided to sit down over the summer and just read as much as we could for like a couple of hours. And I read a couple of little books, this being one of them. And I read it right before that, I think, actually. I may have lied. I read it the day before that, I think. But it's a super interesting novel read from a plural perspective. So it's always we did this, we feel this, etc. A plural, first person plural. Even though it does mention specifics, it's more of like a conglomerate thing, and it's discussing these specifically Japanese women who are essentially mail order brides to come to California, to come to the US, um, as they travel across the ocean and live their lives in the US, and what it's like for them. And while it varies from being like a migrant worker's wife to being a fairly rich man's, influential man's wife, it's still considered like a plural, homogenous group type thing. And it was very interestingly constructed, which is one of the things that I really loved about it. But it was also very poignant. Like there were definitely a sense that every single sentence in this book was put there for a reason, and it was meant for you to think about it and look at it and sort of parse through the language. And I do always enjoy books like that that have me thinking a little bit more about how it's constructed and why choices were made by the author, and what this particular choice actually means for characters or the themes or whatever it is that has to do with the thing. So if you're a person who likes literary fiction in that way that has an interesting construction, um, it's definitely one to look at, especially if you haven't read a lot of Asian American fiction or fiction based out of Asian countries. It's an interesting thing to look at, especially because it takes place right before World War II, so like turn of the century United States, and discusses things like the concentration camps that we had on the West Coast because of the Japanese part of World War II. That's not often discussed in American history. Like we were the good guys, right? Like we would never do anything like that, and we had work camps and things, prejudices that were happening here as well. Um, so yeah, that was a thing that I wanted to talk about. I also wanted to talk about some of my like most disappointing books of the year, and unfortunately, this guy was one of them. It's a huge, chunky guy. Lots of people know that I really love Anita Blake and I love Laurel K. Hamilton, but reading Crimson Death took me about a year to pick it up for the first part. And usually, this is an author that like I go and get the book the day it comes out and I read it that day. This one in particular was one that I picked up and I read part of and then put it down. And my biggest complaint with this guy was actually similar to my complaint with Special Topics and Calamity Physics, but to a greater extent in that maybe 3/4 of this book was me being like, these are discussions the characters needed to have. These are discussions that perhaps we could have seen bits and pieces of, but I didn't need to spend 400 pages listening to characters talk about stuff when the thing that like is super pressing is this murder case and these vampires going rogue and her needing to solve this. She's talking about interpersonal stuff with her like close relationship characters, which is important. But when the main driving plot of the book is a murder mystery and you only really see 200 pages of murder mystery in a 700-page novel, oh, it hurt me so much. And again, I love these characters and I love the author and the world that she's created, but I was like so disappointed in this, and it made me so sad to have this book that like it's part of a series that I really love and was very important to me growing up, and characters that I want to follow and want to know about as I just knock things off my desk. that was very frustrating for me to have to read. And I still read the whole thing, and I still, for the most part, stand by the series. It's just one of those books that was not a hit book for me, and she did take a year off. So I'm hoping that the book that's going to be coming out this spring is a little bit better. I know that she's starting with a new editor, and this book I think was actually the first book with that new editor. So there may be issues there where they were trying to get through their like groove and getting into a new sort of headspace when it comes to editor writer relationships. Um, but that was one of my biggest things, was that I felt like more of this book needed to be edited down, or like the pacing of it needed to be shifted in a way that made more sense for my brain. Um, One of the other books that was really disappointing, not surprising, but really disappointing, was The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman. For the past 3 years, I think the Magician's trilogy has been on my bottom five. I know a lot of people really love it, and a lot of people really love the TV show. Our book club has read it every single year we finish the trilogy. Um, and it's just really disappointing. The characters are annoying, and oh, we just did not like it. All of us. None of the three of us liked it, and it's unfortunate, but that's the case. I wasn't expecting to like it, and it ended up being, I don't know if it was definitely not as frustrating as the second book, because I wanted the second book to be good, and then the ending of it ruined it. But it was like all of it was disappointing, which in a way made it worse. For me, at least. Um, Other notable things for me to talk about, please, please, please go out and read Insignificant Events of a Life in the Cactus, in the Life of a Cactus. That was a book that I really loved and honestly think should be important for libraries, teachers. It needs to stand up as like one of the seminal texts on acceptance and just diversity in children's literature, because there's a character with mental health issues, there's a character with physical deformities, and it's not, the characters aren't going boohoo, our life sucks because we have been thrown these curveballs. They're stories about these characters accepting themselves, and stories about these characters being completely fine and normal characters, even with these physical anomalies, mental anomalies, that sort of affect their life but don't necessarily name, like become them. That's the only thing, which was my biggest issue with Wonder. Another book that I read this year was that I felt like it was too, not self-sacrificing, but self-gratifying, of him being like, "Oh, woe is me! It sucks. I was born with a facial deformity, and everybody thinks I'm weird, and they bully me at school." Whereas the characters in Insignificant Events are much more like, think what you want about me, and think that I can't do things, but I can definitely do things. Just might need to do it a different way than you, and I can do it. And it had a much more positive look in my mind, and was less, I don't know, it just, that's one of the things that bothered me with Wonder, and Insignificant Events did the exact opposite of that. Other things notable that happened this year, I sort of switched my blog over from a more general reading blog to focusing specifically on children's literature and discussing topics that I used to discuss at my job at Barnes and Noble, because a lot of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles had questions walking into that section that not everybody would be able to answer. And I wanted to create a space that was discussing that from not a parent's perspective, but from a more objective third party perspective, of just somebody that really knows the genre, the age group, what things that are helpful. And I'm hoping to continue that in the new year. I posted a post earlier today, which you can go and see, which was a look at some of the books being released in January for kids, from picture books all the way up to middle grade fiction, um, which is a thing I'm hoping to do every month, is to look at what's new coming out, whether it's the next book in a series that everybody's loving, or a new book that is coming out just this month and might be worth looking at, but you might not hear about otherwise, because I don't see people talking about kids' books, especially online, in the same way that I see people talking about YA or adult fiction. So that's one of the things to do. I should link that down in the description. I haven't done it yet with the live stream, but I can do it afterwards. But I think that's about it. I was able to fulfill my reading goals. I liked a fair number of books this year. Most of my books were like 3, 4 star reads, like good, but they didn't blow me away. And I only had a handful of books that were really disappointing for me. Um, Hopefully, you guys are having a better new year than I am. I have a stomach bug, so I'm just really miserable right now, and I'm glad that I was able to sit down long enough to do this live stream without having to run to the bathroom. TMI. But I hope you guys are doing good. We'll be back Wednesday with a new video that I'm working on. Gretchen, I know, has a video for Friday. We've switched to me on Monday and her on Friday just based on her school schedule and everything, and hopefully that works out a little bit better for her. And hopefully I'm able to continue doing content. I did buy a charger for my camera, and I charged the battery, and then I put the battery in my camera, and the camera didn't turn on. So I don't know if the battery is dead now, or if the charger I bought didn't work, but it does seem to be like acknowledging that it's trying to charge the battery. It just also charged immediately, so I think that the battery just might be shot for whatever reason. So now I need to buy a new battery. Things. Effort. Yeah, so I hope you guys are having a good new year. I hope to hear from you how 2017 was or what your goals are for 2018 down below in the comment section or on your own videos and all of that. I will be around. Gretchen will be around. We'll talk to you again soon. Yeah, have a good week. Have a good year. I hope last year was okay. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.